Imagine waking up tomorrow and realizing the person in the mirror isn't really you. The memories, the opinions, the dreams you defend. What if they're only borrowed masks? What if the I you've been protecting is just a story your mind tells to feel safe? Every choice you've made, every success you've chased, built on an identity that might not even exist. If everything you thought you were suddenly cracked open, what would be left? This is the moment you begin to question everything you've been told about yourself and step toward a freedom you didn't know was possible. Imagine waking up one morning and feeling for the first time that something about you is not quite real. You reach for your phone, your name flashes across the lock screen, and yet the letters feel foreign, like a mask you've been wearing for so long you forgot it was there. You walk to the mirror, and the reflection staring back seems strangely detached, as if it were an actor playing you rather than you yourself. In that instant, a whisper creeps into your mind. Who am I really? Most people would shake off such a moment, chalking it up to lack of sleep or stress, but you don't. Instead, you linger with the unease, letting it grow. You notice how easily your thoughts seem to run on autopilot, how your voice sounds like a recording you've heard 1,000 times, how your preferences, your opinions, even your dreams feel recycled from somewhere else. Like a stage set built overnight, your identity looks solid but hollow when you knock on it. You've been told your whole life that you are a single, unified self, an I at the center of your story. But what if that's only a convenient fiction, a story stitched together by memory, habit, and desire? What if everything you call me is more like a collage of borrowed images, fragments of family expectations, cultural scripts, marketing slogans, and instincts stitched together so seamlessly you mistake it for something solid? If you allow yourself to dwell on this possibility, a deeper paradox emerges. The very self you're using to question your identity may be nothing more than the illusion you're questioning, a mirage trying to verify its own existence. Can a dreamer wake up inside the dream without ending it? Can the puppet cut its own strings while still dancing? The unease sharpens. You begin to notice how fiercely people defend their identities, their beliefs, their values, their roles, as though these were sacred objects rather than shifting constructs. You notice how arguments on the internet, in politics, in religion, all orbit the same unspoken assumption, that there is a solid self whose honor must be protected, whose narrative must prevail. But what if that assumption is the very source of so much conflict and suffering? Consider the way you speak about yourself. I am anxious. I am successful. I am a failure. I am spiritual. I am nothing. Every statement begins with I am, but who or what is that I that claims ownership of these changing states? When you were a child, you thought you were one thing. As a teenager, another. As an adult, yet another. Which version was the real you? Or was each only a temporary mask worn by something deeper, or perhaps by nothing at all? Your mind reels at the possibilities. If the self is an illusion, then who suffers when you fail? Who triumphs when you succeed? Who exactly is walking through life, making choices, telling this story? And if you are not who you think you are, then what becomes of morality, meaning, responsibility? Does everything dissolve into chaos, or is there a freedom hidden behind the crumbling facade? In moments of crisis, grief, heartbreak, near-death experiences, people sometimes report a strange clarity, as if the walls of their ego cracked and they glimpsed something vast beyond. Mystics call it awakening, psychologists call it ego dissolution, poets call it the death before death. Whatever the name, the experience leaves an indelible impression. The sense that I is not what you thought, and that life itself is far stranger and more intimate than the story you were telling. Right now, standing before the mirror of your own awareness, you may feel the first tremors of that realization. You may feel curiosity tangled with fear, liberation knotted with loss. Because if the self you've been defending, polishing, and presenting is not ultimately real, then what are you left with? Who are you when the costumes are stripped away, when the story collapses, when you stop believing your own narration? Most people turn away from these questions because they threaten the very ground they stand on. But you, right now, are being invited to stand at the edge of that ground and look down into the abyss, not as an act of despair, but as an act of radical honesty. The abyss might not be empty at all. It might be the space where a deeper truth waits, patient and silent, for those who dare to see. And so the stage is set. The illusion of self is beginning to flicker. The story you've been living is starting to feel like someone else's script. What happens next will depend on whether you look away or whether you take the first step into the unknown and question everything you've ever assumed about who you are. You stand at the edge of the abyss of self-doubt, yet the world around you continues as if nothing has changed. People rush to work, scroll their feeds, argue over politics, sell products, and chase dreams, all while quietly assuming their identities are fixed, authentic, and unshakable. But beneath that calm surface runs an undercurrent of quiet desperation. If you look closely, you'll see it in people's eyes on the subway, in the restless tone of conversations, in the compulsive way we reach for our phones. Anything to avoid being alone with the question, who am I, really? This avoidance is not accidental. Psychology has long noted the mind's tendency to construct stories in order to manage uncertainty. Carl Jung called it the persona, the mask we wear to meet society's expectations. He warned that when we identify too much with this mask, we lose contact with the deeper, chaotic, but also more authentic layers of the psyche. Behind the persona lurks the shadow, all those disowned parts of ourselves we've denied or repressed. And the more rigidly we cling to our constructed identity, the more powerful and disruptive the shadow becomes. Yet the illusion of self isn't just a personal defense mechanism, it's also a social contract. From childhood you were taught to answer, "Who are you?" with a name, a role, a belief, a nationality. Those answers were rewarded. Ambiguity was not. A child who says, "I don't know who I am," is met with concern or correction, not curiosity. Society thrives on predictable identities because predictable identities can be governed, marketed to, and measured. A fluid self is inconvenient. A questioning self is dangerous. Philosophers have wrestled with this for centuries. Nietzsche warned of the herd instinct, the way society molds individuals into docile replicas, afraid to become who they truly are. Sartre argued that our essence is not given but created, and that most of us flee from this freedom into bad faith, the self-deception of pretending we're fixed and determined. Schopenhauer went even further, seeing the individual self as merely a manifestation of a blind, universal will. Each thinker, in his own way, pointed to the same hidden problem. The self we take for granted may be little more than a story told to keep chaos at bay. Modern neuroscience echoes this unsettling idea. There is no single self-center in the brain. Instead, researchers find a patchwork of networks responsible for memory, perception, emotion, and decision-making. The I you feel so intimately is an emergent process, a narrative stitched together, moment by moment. When certain brain regions are damaged, people can lose their sense of personal continuity or even feel as if their limbs no longer belong to them. The self is not a thing, but an activity, like a flame flickering atop a candle. And yet, paradoxically, we cling to this activity as if it were our anchor. We say, "my thoughts, my feelings, my life," believing there is a stable owner behind the flux. This belief has survival value. It gives us coherence, helps us navigate a world of threats and promises, but it also breeds suffering. The tighter we grasp our identity, the more threatened we feel by anything that challenges it. A simple disagreement becomes an attack on me. A failure at work becomes a wound to my worth. A relationship ending becomes, "I am unlovable." The story turns every experience into proof of or threat to an imagined self. Consider addiction, not just to substances, but to approval, status, or certainty. Gabor Mate observes that addiction is often a response to pain and disconnection, attempts to soothe a void within. But if the self at the center of your life is an illusion, then the void you're trying to fill might be a void created by the illusion itself. The ego builds a separate me, then suffers from the separation and seeks escape. Like a hamster running on a wheel, the cycle feeds on itself. This hidden problem shapes even our noblest pursuits. We chase self-improvement not just to grow, but to solidify an identity, the successful self, the spiritual self, the healed self. We seek meaning to reassure ourselves there is a someone to be meaningful. Even altruism can mask the craving to see ourselves as good, worthy, or enlightened. It's not that these pursuits are bad. It's that without awareness of the illusion, they reinforce the very structure we might need to question. The roots of the problem run deep. They intertwine with evolutionary drives, cultural conditioning, and psychological defenses. To question the self is to question not just your personal narrative, but the scaffolding of society itself, its roles, its hierarchies, its rewards. No wonder so few dare to do it. No wonder those who do are often dismissed as eccentric, nihilistic, or even mad. Yet, as history shows, many of humanity's most transformative insights, religious awakenings, artistic breakthroughs, scientific revolutions, began with someone daring to step outside the assumed boundaries of identity. Right now, you stand at the threshold of that daring. The hidden problem of the self as illusion is no longer an abstract idea. It's a living tension in your awareness. You sense its psychological roots in your own habits of thought. You glimpse its philosophical roots in the writings of those who came before, but you also feel that we're not yet at the heart of the matter. What happens if you don't just see the illusion, but continue to live inside it? What are the unseen consequences of clinging to a self that may not be real? That question leads us into the next layer of the labyrinth, the part of the story where the cost of the illusion becomes visible, where the hidden machinery starts to shape the world you inhabit in ways you never imagined. You've begun to sense the mask. You've traced its origins in psychology, philosophy, and society. But sensing an illusion is not the same as escaping it. In fact, the illusion often grows more insidious once you notice it. It hides in plain sight, camouflaged within every choice you make. Its consequences reach far beyond your private thoughts. They shape the entire architecture of your life and the world you help build. Look at the way you wake up in the morning. Even before you open your eyes, a stream of thoughts starts. What you have to do, who you need to impress, how you see, compare to others. Before you've even stood up, the self has already returned, narrating, judging, strategizing. It feels natural, but in truth it's compulsive. You don't have thoughts. Thoughts have you. They recreate the me who must achieve, defend, and prove. Without noticing, you spend your day acting out a script you didn't write. This isn't harmless. A self built on illusion reacts to life with constant low-level fear. Fear of losing status, of being humiliated, of being wrong, fear of death, fear of meaninglessness. It interprets every challenge as a threat to its story. That fear drives competition, aggression, withdrawal, addiction. It turns co-workers into rivals, strangers into enemies, differences into dangers. Entire cultures are organized around feeding and defending this fragile sense of me. Cognitive science sheds light on this trap. The default mode network in your brain, the system active when you're daydreaming, planning, or remembering, is also the network most tied to self-referential thinking. It's the voice constantly narrating, "I am this, I need that. What will they think of me?" When the network quiets through meditation, flow states, intense grief, or psychedelics, people often report a sense of unity, peace, or selflessness. They describe life as happening through them, not to them, but most of the time, the default mode network dominates, and its chatter becomes invisible background noise. The consequence is a life lived inside a movie you mistake for reality. These unseen consequences extend to the collective level. A society of isolated selves must be held together by laws, incentives, and surveillance. It breeds consumerism because each me feels a hole to fill. It fosters propaganda because identity needs a story to sustain it. It fuels polarization because when beliefs become identity, disagreement feels like annihilation. Even our technologies reflect this pattern. Social media algorithms thrive on outrage because outrage is the ego's favorite fuel. You're not just scrolling, you're being sculpted. There's a darker layer still. When you're trapped in an illusion of self, even your noblest emotions can be co-opted. Compassion turns into self-image. I am a good person. Activism turns into moral superiority. I am on the right side. Spirituality turns into ego. I am enlightened. Without noticing, the self colonizes your virtues. You can spend years improving yourself and end up reinforcing the very structure you hope to transcend. This is why so many people feel emptier the more they achieve. They've built a taller tower on shifting sand. The suffering this creates is subtle but pervasive. It shows up as chronic dissatisfaction, a gnawing sense that no success is enough, no relationship safe, no pleasure lasting. It shows up as projection, blaming others for the qualities you've disowned in yourself. It shows up as rigidity, clinging to identities even when they cause pain, because losing them feels like death. In extreme cases, it manifests as burnout, breakdown, or the numbness of depression, a silent rebellion of the psyche against a false life. And yet, from the outside, everything looks normal. You may have a career, a family, a social circle. You may be admired. The illusion doesn't crumble in one dramatic moment. It erodes slowly, like a river carving stone. That's why people can live decades under its spell without realizing the cost. The hidden toll is paid in intimacy, creativity, and freedom. When the I must always be defended, there's little space for genuine connection or spontaneous action. Life becomes a performance rather than a participation. It's tempting to think you're immune because you're aware of the problem. But awareness alone is not freedom. The ego can appropriate even the insight the self is an illusion and turn it into a badge. I am the one who understands. In some ways, that's the most dangerous tours. Wrap of all, a subtler, more sophisticated identity, harder to see and easier to justify. So here you are, staring at the web you've been caught in. You see how deeply it shapes your thoughts, relationships, and society. You feel the tension of living a life that may not be truly yours. The question presses harder now. If the self is an illusion, and that illusion drives so much suffering, what would it mean to live without it? Is it even possible? Would everything dissolve into chaos? Or is there another way of being hidden beneath the surface, one that the illusion has kept from you all along? That question marks the threshold of rebellion. It's the point where philosophy stops being abstract and becomes personal, urgent. To step beyond the illusion is to risk losing the only identity you've ever known. But it may also be the only path to genuine freedom. The next section will take you there, to the moment where people throughout history have said enough and turned to face the unknown. It's the place where rebellion begins, not against society, but against the inner tyrant you've mistaken for yourself. Something in you has already begun to rebel. You've seen the illusion. You've felt its grip. Awareness alone won't dissolve it, but it cracks the first line in the mask. The next move is not about finding a new identity to cling to. It's about loosening your allegiance to all identities. It's a rebellion, but not in the way you've been taught. It isn't about shouting louder, winning arguments, or wearing the right labels. It's about quietly, radically refusing to mistake the mask for your face. This rebellion begins with looking rather than doing. Most of your life you've been trained to act, fix, improve. Now the invitation is to observe, to see the self in action without automatically believing it. Every time a thought appears, I can't do this, I'm better than them, I need to prove myself. Notice it as a thought, not as me. You're not pushing it away, you're seeing it clearly. Over time, you begin to discover a gap between the story and the written sense of the story. In that gap lies freedom. Many traditions have pointed to this gap in their own language. The Stoics called it distinguishing what is up to us and what is not. The Buddhists spoke of anatta, the non-self. Jung urged people to integrate the shadow so they could act from wholeness rather than persona. Nietzsche dared readers to become who you are, which is less a command to invent a new identity and more a challenge to peel back false ones. Each of these paths is a form of rebellion, a turning inward to reclaim what has been outsourced to society, culture, or ego. But rebellion isn't only inward. As your perception shifts, your relationships and choices inevitably change. You start to notice where you've been living to please, to conform, to appear. You realize how much of your schedule, your goals, your spending, your conversations are organized around maintaining a self-image. You may feel waves of fear. If I stop, I'll disappear. But you also taste a strange relief. There is less to defend, less to prove, more space to simply respond to life as it unfolds. This rebellion has a paradoxical flavor. It's both fierce and gentle. Fierce because you're confronting the deepest conditioning you have. Gentle because you're not replacing one rigid identity with another. You're practicing what Sartre called authenticity, living from freedom rather than habit. Sometimes that looks like saying no to a path everyone expects you to take. Sometimes it's as subtle as noticing the compulsion to post online just to be seen and choosing not to. Each act of refusal chips away at the illusion. One of the most powerful tools in this process is self-inquiry. Ask yourself in real time, who is experiencing this thought? Who is angry right now? Who needs to be right? Don't rush to answer with philosophy or theology, just look directly. You may find that what you see, I, is less like a solid entity and more like a shifting field of sensations, memories, and stories. The more you look, the harder it is to find a center. This can feel disorienting at first, even threatening, but if you stay with it, a new kind of presence emerges, open, alert, and not owned by anyone. Another tool is to experiment with silence and solitude, not as escape, but as confrontation. Modern life is designed to fill every gap with noise, scrolling, or chatter. In the gaps, the false self feels naked, yet it's in those gaps that you can watch the machinery unwind. Sit quietly for even 10 minutes a day and notice how the sense of I arises and fades. Watch how it claims sensations and disowns others. Slowly, you'll see it for what it is, a process, not a prison. Rebellion also means reclaiming the shadow. Everything you've denied about yourself, anger, need, vulnerability, brilliance, waits in that shadow. Integrating it doesn't mean acting out impulses or indulging every desire. It means acknowledging them as part of the human experience rather than banishing them to the basement. As Jung wrote, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. When you integrate the shadow, your self becomes more porous, more fluid, less brittle. You stop fighting yourself and start seeing through yourself. Over time, a subtle shift takes place. The narrator in your head is still there, but it's no longer your tyrant. Emotions rise and fall without turning into identity. Success and failure still happen, but they no longer define you. You can engage with life, build, love, create, struggle, without the constant tension of protecting me. This isn't a mystical disappearance of the ego, it's a reconfiguration of your relationship to it. You're still a person, but you're not confined to the story of that person. History is full of examples of people who lived this rebellion. Some were monks and mystics, others were artists, scientists, or ordinary individuals who quietly refused to play the usual games. They may have spoken different languages and used different symbols, but their eyes carried the same look, a freedom that didn't depend on status, success, or self-image. They didn't abolish their personalities, they stopped worshipping them, and that made all the difference. This is the invitation before you, not to destroy yourself, but to see through the illusion of the self you've been conditioned to defend. Not to escape life, but to enter it more directly, without the constant filter of egoic anxiety. The rebellion isn't a one-time event. It's a practice, a way of moving through the world. Each moment you see the story as a story, you loosen its grip. Each time you act from presence rather than persona, you step out of the cage. And yet, even this rebellion is not the end. It's the doorway, because beyond the rebellion lies something even more radical, not just loosening your grip on the self, but realizing what's been here all along when the self falls silent. That is where we go next, into the ultimate truth, the deepest realization, where the question, who am I, dissolves into something vaster than an answer. You've walked to the edge of the map. You've stared at the mask, traced its origins, seen its consequences, and begun the quiet rebellion of looking without grasping. What remains now is not another technique, not another identity, but a revelation. It's the point where the question, who am I, burns so completely that only silence is left. And in that silence, something unexpected appears. Not an answer, but an experience. Imagine sitting alone, no phone, no tasks, no performance. Thoughts rise and fall, sensations flicker. The familiar I tries to narrate but finds nothing to cling to. For a heartbeat, the stream pauses. In that pause, you notice a presence that isn't owned by anyone. Not a void, not a thing, but a sigh. Ample, ungraspable awareness. Silent, open, unbounded. You realize that this presence has been here the whole time, before every thought of me, during every role you've played, after every story ends. It's not an object you can see, it's the seeing itself. This is the deepest paradox. You cannot find your true self as an object because it's the subject of all finding. You cannot become it because you've never stopped being it. The illusion was never that there was nothing here. The illusion was that what's here could be captured by a name, a role, or a story. When that illusion falls, the world doesn't dissolve into chaos. It becomes more vivid. Colors seem brighter, sounds clearer, relationships more immediate. Life moves without the constant commentary of mine and not mine. Mystics across cultures have described this shift. Some call it awakening, enlightenment, union with the divine. Others speak of the death of the ego, or non-dual awareness. Philosophers gesture at it in more cautious terms: the ground of being, pure consciousness, the field of experience. The words differ, but the taste is the same: a freedom not dependent on conditions, a peace that's not the opposite of turmoil, a love that doesn't need an object. It's not an achievement, but a recognition, like realizing you were wearing glasses all along and mistaking them for the world. This realization is not an escape from being human. You still feel joy and sorrow, hunger and fatigue. You still have a personality, a history, a set of responsibilities. But they are no longer a prison. They're like waves on the surface of an ocean. The waves rise and fall, but the ocean remains. Even pain, loss, and death appear differently, not as personal injustices, but as movements of a vast process you are not separate from. You see that the self you defended was never the true target of life's events. It was a temporary pattern, like a whirlpool in a river. The river flows on. This shift also reframes morality and meaning. The illusion of a separate self dissolves. Compassion stops being an obligation or an identity. It becomes natural, like the left hand helping the right when it's injured. You act not because you're trying to be a good person, but because the boundary between you and others feels thinner, more porous, even illusory. The same goes for creativity and work. They stop being ways to prove yourself and start being ways life expresses itself through you. Action becomes freer, lighter, yet often more potent. None of this means you'll float through life in a perpetual trance. Old habits return. The ego reasserts itself. But something fundamental has shifted. You know, in your bones, that you are not the story. Even when the story arises, you see it as a story. This recognition can't be unseen. It's like waking up from a dream, and even if you drift back into sleep, remembering that it was a dream. That memory slowly erodes the dream's hold. There is a subtle danger here. The mind may try to turn even this realization into an identity. I am awakened. I am special. I am beyond ego. That's just the illusion wearing new clothes. The deeper truth carries no badge, no superiority. It's utterly ordinary, so ordinary it was overlooked all your life. You don't own it. It's what you are when ownership falls away. And so you arrive at the ultimate truth, which is less a statement than an intimacy. The one who was seeking has always been what was sought. The one who questioned has always been the answer. When you question everything, even the questioner dissolves. What remains is not nothingness but a living mystery, self-luminous, silent, yet overflowing with life. From this vantage point, the great drama of identity still unfolds. People striving, fearing, loving, hurting. You may still play your roles, but now you play them consciously, like an actor who knows it's a play but says cheese, till feels every line. You can inhabit your persona without being possessed by it. You can engage the world's struggles without losing the stillness underneath. You can love more deeply because you're not clinging to what you love as a means to define yourself. This is the end of the script, and also its beginning. Nothing has changed, yet everything has. The illusion of self was never a mistake. It was a stage, a necessary cocoon. But a cocoon isn't a prison when you're ready to emerge. The rebellion, the questioning, the shadow work, all of it has been the slow cracking of the shell. What you glimpse now is the sky beyond it. So pause. Feel the breath moving in and out without a you doing it. Feel the ground beneath your feet without a you standing on it. Let the words fall silent for a moment and notice what remains. Not a concept, not a belief, just this. The space in which all selves appear and disappear. The freedom that was never lost. The life that's living you. This is what happens when you question everything. You don't end up with answers. You end up with reality. Unfiltered, unowned, awake. And from here, the journey of being human begins again. Not as a problem to solve, but as a mystery to live.